Welcome. Thank you all for coming to our seminar. We're going to talk about qualified small employer health reimbursement arrangements. Let me introduce my partner in crime here. This is Karen Brady, Georgetown graduate, very smart person, attorney, who specializes in business transactions and in estate planning.
Correct.
Doesn't chase any ambulances that I know of.
No,
no.
Try to avoid
Even
those.
though we're going to be talking about medical issues. This is something new. I'm so happy you could join us. If you can find yourself a chair, then we're going to be on our way here. So by way of introduction, I'm going to tell you some things that you already know. That's always the best place to start, right? In 2010, 17.6% of the gross domestic product, that is, all of the dollars that are moving through the U.S. economy, was spent on health care. That's in 2010. That has grown since then. We have an extremely high percentage of spending in health care in the U.S. This graph that you have in your handout shows that here we are at 17.1%, where the next highest percentage of GDP for any country is France, with 6 percentage points less than we spend in the US on healthcare. And if you look at that list of countries, France, Sweden, Germany, much more socialistic perspective for healthcare, where you go to one provider, the UK I think is listed up there, but they're clear down, look at this, at 8.8%. What does the UK have? Socialized medicine. In 1964, when I was in high school and I was in the debate club, our topic was to debate whether the UK should adopt socialized medicine or not. And they did within 10 years of me debating both sides of it. And here the US hasn't, we don't even want to think about it. An updated slide comparing us to other countries. We are at 18%. Well, look at other countries. The next highest is Sweden, and many of the other countries, if you look at some of these lines, have actually decreased their spending in healthcare. Fascinating, because our trend seems to be ever upward, and this is from 1995 forward over a 20-year period. 17.8%, another graph for your review, and this I think is more alarming. This came from the Kaiser Health Foundation about the costs per firm and worker premium contributions in 2017. This is just, to me, astonishing what we're paying for health care premiums only, and where the money is coming from, single provider and the family, and what the employer and worker are contributing here. One more graph. Here's the average annual health insurance premium and worker contributions for family coverage, again from the Kaiser Health Foundation. Cost increases from 2007 to 2012, 30%, and the employer has tonied up even more than that increase, 31.5%. So if it was an employer-provided plan, the employer's having to dig deeper into their pocket to keep up with the changes, 30% in 5 years. And in the most recent 5 years, you can see the line is continuing to go up. We've had costs increase from 2012 to 2017, another 5-year period, of almost 20%, 19.2%, and the employer increase is 32.4%, so they've had to kick up even more to help the worker cover the costs of health insurance. This is on family coverage. Last slide, I believe, is this one, and I find this interesting because it tells us the percentage of firms who are offering health benefits to their employers. It stratifies these by the number of workers, 3 to 49, 50 to 99, this is 100 or more workers.
Right.
This is the large one. These are the small employers, and then this is all firms. And if you look at the year 2010, what happened in 2010 here in the U.S.?
Obamacare.
We passed the ACA
Right.
in March of 2010, Obamacare. And look at the percentage of firms. What spiked in that year was the number of firms that offered health coverage, 69% overall. Large employers, 99% in 2010 were offering health benefits to their employees. What's the trend that has happened since 2010? The amount of employer coverage has declined rather than improved.
Right. Almost immediately, what I saw amongst my clients was they started to see that offering an employer-sponsored plan was more expensive than just offering a benefit to their employees to be able to pay for their own thing. Even if it was, we're going to talk about how you can do that with a qualified self-employment plan, small employers plan. Mm-hmm. But even if they were just saying, okay, we're going to give you a bonus and spend it on what you want, it was cheaper than trying to stay up with the employer-sponsored plans.
And health benefits are for employers pre-tax, correct? If they pay the premiums, if we help our employees with the premiums, that's pre-tax. If I give Christina a bonus, she has to be very, very good. Then what do I have to do with that bonus? I have to pay FICA tax, and she has to pay FICA tax, and she has to pay federal and state taxes on that. With health benefits, none of that applies, and yet it was less expensive to simply hand the employee a check so that they could pay tax on it, we could pay tax on it, and have them handle their own health insurance benefits rather than dealing. Plus, Karen and I are both employers. The amount of administration and time that it takes on behalf of an employer, we're not even quantifying that. We're just talking about the 7.65% FICA taxes, et cetera. So post-2010, here's what we have right now. When this legislation was passed, I thought, okay, what could possibly go wrong? You've got Health and Human Services, IRS, and Department of Labor, three very large bureaucratic agencies who are involved, plus a lot of smaller ones, because every one of our states has got an insurance commissioner that's got a voice in all of this. This is what we're dealing with right now for health care since Obamacare in March of 2010. So what do we have with, and I have to tell you that I gave a talk to a group called the Women's Estate Planning Council, and I used the anagram ACA. And the very first question I got out of the audience was, what's ACA, right? It's the Affordable Care Act.
And these were supposed to be lawyers, accountants, and financial advisors at this meeting.
They had to have certificate. And I just kind of, it was an attorney actually that asked the question, what's ACA? And I said, okay, we're just going to refer to this as Obamacare. Do we have an agreement that even though it says ACA, the equivalent is it's Obamacare? So under ACA, under Obamacare, you had to offer a qualified health plan. And the qualifications were that it had to be certified by the insurance commissioner of the state, it had to offer essential health benefits, and it had to be offered through a health insurer that met certain criteria. There was also some of those, there were a couple of states, Iowa was one, Colorado was another one, where we had a different kind of system, and I'm forgetting what those were.
I'm not sure what you're trying to get to.
Oh, they were more of a cooperative.
Right. We did have some cooperatives, and some employers could be, quote, self-insured through a cooperative type program. Right. And so those existed prior to ACA.
Well,
and were mostly phased out.
There was Colorado Options, I think is the one I'm thinking of, and Iowa had a similar plan, and they collapsed into themselves. The premiums were abhorrently less than other companies like Kaiser, Anthem. The one that was here in Colorado collapsed 2 years ago.
Oh yeah, now I hear what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes, and I think it was Colorado Options. I think
sounds
was the
right.
name of it. And it met other criteria than the ACA. But when it came to the market, it was 17% less than the cheapest Kaiser premium. So a lot of people flocked to that, and then had about 3 months at the very end where there was questionable of whether there was coverage or not, and you had
Until
to
they
convert
could move over to the new one.
a more recognized plan. None of those have worked. And when we've heard the Republicans talk about block grants or some of their options, you have that high-risk pool. We had one here in Colorado before the ACA.
We've had a high-risk pool for as long as I can remember before Obamacare. And it was still unreasonably expensive for anyone who would try to get in there. So, you could be denied health insurance for like pre-existing conditions, but Colorado had a system where you could still get health insurance through this high-risk pool. But of all my clients who looked into it, I don't think anyone ever did, because they just said, I'll have to get sick, because they couldn't afford to pay the premiums.
And they would drop out of the system, which was the issue that the Obamacare was trying to address, bear in mind that ACA stands for Affordable Care Act. That was the goal in this legislation, was to make this affordable. And it has to offer certain benefits, minimum essential coverage. The insurer has to be licensed by the state. And here's the essential health package. There's a list of about 20 different items that have to be included. But it's very interesting. How many of us have gone in for just an annual physical? Okay. And I'm on Medicare, so I can't have an annual physical under Medicare. I have an annual wellness visit, an AWV. I can't have a physical under Medicare. That's per SCL. I'm quoting them. Okay. If I happen to have developed a cold prior to my annual wellness visit, let's say it's the physical, and I ask the doctor for a treatment for maybe a strep throat test, right? What happens to my free annual physical?
It got co-opted.
It got co-opted because I had a cold, and that's not part of the essential coverage. That's an additional treatment. So the doctors have to be very cognizant, because it's all electronic billing now, about how they have to code things. So the annual wellness visit or the annual physical has to be identified as such, and if they offer other treatment as part of that, that's going to trigger another code and a copay. Or you need to reschedule one way or the other.
Or it works the other way around. When I went to talk to my physician about travel insurance, because I was traveling outside of the country, she was like, and let's talk about and I don't even remember what it was. But she's like, see, now I can bill this. Yeah. Because I'd seen her a month before, and she's like, well, how's that going, or something. So then she could bill it as something that could actually show up on my insurance.
Well, because she's already treated you for whatever it was that was the issue. So I guess we have continuing coverage for that. But if it's a new visit for a new purpose, then we have to be careful. Cost sharing for essential benefits, of course, we're going to have the free colonoscopy and the free breast test and the free whatever, or at least that's the way it was marketed by Senator Michael Bennet when I attended one of his PowerPoint presentations. And you have these 4 levels, the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum level of coverage. Starting this year, the platinum level of coverage is going to be a problem, because that's more than the employer should be offering. Okay, employer-provided health benefits, I think I just stated this, are not to be subject to federal income taxes or FICA taxes or FUTA taxes, because it's part of a health plan. There's a code section 105 and 106, 2 of them, that say health plans are not to be taxed. It's a tax-free benefit. So if my husband is employed by the state of Colorado, so when he gets his W-2 at the end of the year, it'll say, these are all the things that you have to pay tax on. And by the way, just so you know how much it cost us, we also cover your health insurance, which is this much a year. And it's not really useful for preparing our taxes. It's more PR for them
to know that they're really shelling out some money.
My husband and I, John, were talking about that as we drove past the Storage Tech campus. By the way, I don't know how many of you have heard that Amazon might consider the Storage Tech campus for its second Amazon center. And right now it's just sitting fallow. But back in the 80s, that was the first employer I ever saw that would give this Wonders of Me letter to the employees saying, we matched your FICA, we paid your health insurance premium, and they would cost all of that out by employee, or we paid education benefits, whatever it was. Well, that was all well and good. We had the minimum essential health coverage and the mandated coverage. Couldn't be turned down, coverage until you're 26, right, on your parents' policy. We're still in transition. The law was passed in 2010. The taxes that started to pay that, the net investment tax and the Medicare surtax, came in 2013. 2014, we're going live. The marketplaces are up in the fall of 2013. So in 2013, IRS and Department of Labor are trying to answer questions that have been asked over the last 3 years. Well, what about this? And what about that? And will this work? And can I continue to do this? So a little bit of a history lesson. Prior to Obamacare, we had health reimbursement accounts, flexible spending accounts, and employer payment plans. Those were all authorized under certain sections of the code. But they started under Obamacare to be considered group health plans. Now, group health plans have got to meet all the mandates required by Obamacare.
And they didn't.
They didn't.
Your health reimbursement arrangement, the HRA, was something that I did prior to Obamacare with my employees. The idea there was that there was a limit on how much I would reimburse them for their out-of-pocket medical expenses and or their own premiums for health insurance. But it doesn't look anything like the minimum plan that has to be provided by an employer under Obamacare. So IRS and Department of Labor both kind of stumbled over themselves for a long time going, can we still do that? Can we still do that? And eventually they decided that you cannot. And as a matter of fact, if you offer a plan under that does not comply with Obamacare, you have what I think it's $1,000 a day penalty. You're going to get to that.
Yep, $1,000 per day, $36,500 per employee per year if you violate the sanctions dictated by Obamacare.
So if I had continued that, doing what I thought was a good thing for my employees, we'd have had a big chunk of penalty to have to pay.
The HRAs put an annual dollar limit on essential health benefits. Karen could write a plan, a health reimbursement arrangement that said, I will fund up to $2,000 for each and every employee in my employ. But that's all I'm going to cover. Well, Obamacare would not allow a hard dollar figure to be imposed. Couldn't do it. If it wasn't grandfathered, didn't work. Then the FSAs, so if one employee, so let me give you a situation. I grew up in Iowa, so there's a lot of small farmers there. And there's a company out there that sells something called the QSEHRA plan. So if Farmer Brown employs Mrs. Brown, and she's the only employee, there is some kind of a plan, kind of like an HRA, that will still work for one employee where Mrs. Brown's wages are deducted by the business. Of course, we're going to add that back as income on the front of the 1040, and her benefits are tax deductible on the farmer's business schedule. Not subject to FICA, all the goodies that we talked about, health benefits. However, if you have more than one employee, as Karen did, you could no longer offer that kind of set dollar figure. And the problem with the Farmer Brands of the world and that QSEHRA plan is that it's supposed to be modified every year. It's supposed to move, and they're supposed to actually pay wages to Mrs. Brown.
Right, that's the employee
and sometimes they didn't do that. Well, she got the egg money, right? I mean, that's what she was supposed to get. And there's a penalty if you continue to do that. $2,500 minimum, $100 per day. It was $100, not $1,000. We embellished, but that still equals to $36,500. So the HRA, about the only time that would work is if you have one employee, or you could set up a standalone health reimbursement account for retirees only who do not work. That's it. Now, the FSAs, this is where my clients get really confused. There's an HSA and an FSA. You get into this alphabet soup. This is a flexible spending account. And prior to Obamacare, you could put up to $5,000 pre-tax if your employer offered this benefit to cover out-of-pocket medical expenses per year. This is called a 125 plan, so there's a code section that sanctions this. Due to the necessity for more taxes to fund Medicaid expansion, let's figure out we had to have dollars to do that, right? The restriction for the flexible spending accounts dropped by half, 50% from $5,000 per year to $2,500 per year. And that adjusts for inflation, so it's kicked up to $2,550, and I think it's $2,600 for this year, very modest. They also opened the door a little bit. It used to be you had just the calendar year to deal with any money, and it was use or lose. So I had a client that heard about this FSA, this was many years ago, and he had a son with cystic fibrosis, and they were sitting on about $50,000 of unpaid medical bills. So when the employer offered this $5,000 pre-tax, bingo, I'm going to take that. I'm going to take the $5,000 pre-tax. Only all of the bills had been incurred prior to his entrance into the FSA, and he had maybe a couple $100 of current bills in the year in which he participated. What happened to the $4,800 that he had used pre-tax for the FSA? It was gone. And he came in and said, that can't be right. And I said, but they had to have explained this to you. I mean, it couldn't have been bills you were sitting on. You couldn't have used them. It was a mess. Downside to an employer, before I leave this slide, is that if you create an FSA and your employee signs up and you're going to take their ratable share, let's say that they get paid 25 pay periods a year, and you're going to take $100 a year out of their paycheck to fund this, because in essence they're using their money to reimburse medical expenses. If on January 15th their teenager goes to the orthodontist and their copay for that is $2,500, the employer has to be prepared to write a check for $2,500 even though the employee has only funded $100 into that FSA account.
Yeah. Well, and just keep in mind how much of a nightmare paperwork this is, or was, right? Because you then had to keep track of who was contributing and how, what bills they submitted and whether they qualified.
And whether they were qualified, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of that. So FSAs, or most small businesses, don't offer those. So we come to the last, the EPP, the Employer Payment Plan, and this is where maybe I had 4 employees. I had Bobby, I had Barb, I had Sherry, I had Christina, and they decided that they were not going to come to me for health insurance because their spouses all worked places where they had a group health plan. So I could be generous and say, okay, Christina, how much is it going to cost Andrew out of his pocket to pay for your premiums? And if she told me it was $250 per month, I could write her a check for $250 per month, no FICA on either side, no federal tax on her side, no Colorado tax on my side. It was a plan because I agreed I would reimburse the spousal cost, correct, of that group plan. I didn't have one, and I could deduct that pre-tax, and she was not responsible for paying tax on the benefit. Those were the old days, but they're also now the new days, or could be.
Sort of.
That treatment under this notice that was joint Department of Labor and IRS no longer allowed. When they came out with this 2013-54, it said, you can't do that.
First off, the employer has to pay that $100 a day penalty, and the employee will pay taxes on everything that you gave them.
And that was a very difficult transition for a lot of our clients who had done this program. This was sanctioned by an IRS revenue ruling in 1961. So this had longitudinal habit embedded into the small business employer. Well, I can do that. I can reimburse Barb's spousal coverage. No big deal. And it's a tax-free benefit to her, and I don't have to worry about employment taxes. But this document, notice 2013-54, reversed more than 50 years of habit, and it was we had a couple of clients that just, well, I don't see why I have to do that.
Well, and I don't think it was a very well-publicized notice.
Precisely.
Too many times
yes.
I saw clients kind of get hit in the back with it because they had no idea that what they'd been doing was now no longer applicable.
And some of you may be my clients, and you may not believe this, but I don't like delivering bad news. I really don't. I listened to a CPA say he wants his clients to sit up in their chair when you talk to them. He doesn't want them coming across the desk. Okay, and so this kind of news, Karen, and who's the professional that they see once a year?
To tell them about this, right.
You bet.
And after the fact, right? Yeah.
And usually after the fact, because we're culling through the accounting going, what's that? What are you paying there? Why are you giving Barb a check for $250 a month, 12 times, $3,000, and it didn't run through payroll?
Why aren't you declaring it as,
Negative learning experiences. My kids will tell you those are always the worst. Okay, so we have hope. We've told you all the things you cannot do under Obamacare. Very much buried news in something called the 21st Century CARES Act, which is why we're here today, signed into law December 13th. Everybody was on vacation. They were out shopping for Christmas. I mean, it was amazing. Allowed small employers to provide those health reimbursement accounts again that we said you couldn't do. But
rising like a phoenix, because it doesn't look quite like the old ones did.
Not quite. There are restrictions. Everything old is new again, but this is a refreshed health reimbursement account. How's that? It is defined by the QSE, Qualified Small Employer. So Boeing can't offer this to their employees. Only the people that are in this room that have employees can offer this, because you have to have fewer than 50. So an ALE is a large employer. There are all kinds of alphabet soup with Obamacare. So all businesses of the employer, and that was another thing that we saw with the advent of Obamacare. If you have 50 or more employees, you are mandated to offer group coverage. So we have a concrete contractor who called and said, well, I better set up an LLC to run the curbs and sidewalks. Okay. It's every company that is owned by common percentage, by common ownership, and that's 5 or fewer individuals testing for more than 80%. And a lot of accountants don't work with C corporations and don't understand common control. But boy, did that get resurrected with Obamacare, because that was the initial reaction was, well, I'm going to set up a single member LLC, and I'm going to have all my management people employed over here, and I'll cover them for health insurance, but I'm not going to offer it to the great unwashed because I can't afford to offer it to the 60 employees that are out there digging ditches, right? You couldn't bifurcate like that. You could not do that. It's everyone that was within that controlled group. And you cannot offer a group health insurance plan. So that's the criteria for the employer to qualify. No group insurance coverage is offered, and they are a small, by definition in Obamacare, a small employer. That's the SE.
So what you have to do is you have to then identify who's an eligible employee. And this one, I think, First off, I've had clients try to say, how can I get them out of that, right? But more to the point, I think.
Okay, I'm going to set up a single member LLC for the ditch diggers, right?
So
okay.
this is, an eligible employee is an employee who's worked for you for at least 90 days. So they're not covered until day 91, okay? They have to be at least age 25. They have to have worked for you for at least 30 hours a week.
And that's an average number.
Right, so you can't say, you've got 32 this week and 20 next week, but most of the time you're only 15, then they would not be an eligible employee. But more to the point, you can't keep them from being an eligible employee by trying to say always, okay, most of the time we're going to work you 30 hours a week, but somehow, just a few hours and you're over the average, they're an eligible employee, okay? They can't be seasonal. The law defines that, but it's not counterintuitive. It's
I think
what you'd
it's
expect it to
120
be.
days,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly. It's about tax season. If I want to hire a contractor, not that we accountants had anything to do about
They
it.
can't be subject to a union, the collective bargaining agreement with a union, okay? And they can't be a non-resident alien who doesn't have any U.S. source income. Now, I don't know who the heck qualifies, how that would even come up.
Or what lobby said, let's throw that one in there.
Yeah, I mean, but, so this pretty much covers all of your adult employees. I know I have a few employers who, most of their employees are under the age of 25, so they would not have to cover most of their employees under this. But for the most part, if they've worked for you for more than 91 days, and they work for you full time, meaning more than 30 hours a week, they are eligible, okay?
So it's possible a small janitorial service, a Subway franchisee could qualify to exclude under age 25 and less than 30 hours a week. I mean, it's possible to manipulate that, and quite plausible for the McDonald's and that kind of thing. And it's looked at by the employer, but you have a McDonald's store, you probably have more than 50 employees. It qualifies the requirement, Karen, if who has to pay for it?
The boss, well, the company.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
So the employee cannot be required to make any contributions to this whatsoever.
And we have to set a certain dollar figure. Once the eligible employee brings you proof of coverage, so here's another requirement. The eligible employee has to show that they have qualified ACA coverage. Where do they get that?
Their insurance company.
They get it through the marketplace. They get it, right. Could they have an exemption that would be eligible here, Karen? Medicare, Medicaid,
Right, if they're covered by
tribal
any of those,
rights.
Right, so I had an employee who for a long time was covered by Medicare. And at that point, she would not be able to provide me with proof of the qualified ACA coverage. And at that point, I don't think she would.
She would not
because
be
Medicare is
qualified.
covering enough under the government's philosophy. This is really supposed to be a tack-on, an add-on to an ACA health insurance policy, and not one of the other programs that's available.
Right. So if the employee is eligible for Medicaid, or the children are covered under the CHIP program, you couldn't have a family plan, but maybe
You might
the
still have the
parent.
employee covered.
Right, but the
You had a
employee
question?
might be covered.
Does this end up also applying as far as to officers of the business, or is this just the employees?
What do you mean by-
Hourly, as far as if you have salary, if you have people who have a percentage of the company, this is just for employees, correct?
If they are employed as officers, then they're still eligible employees
Oh, yeah.
if they work more than 30 hours a week. Now, there is one,
Doesn't matter if they're salary.
no, it doesn't matter if they're salaried, hourly, but if they are working more than 30 hours a week and they're over 25 and they've worked you for more than 90 days,
All this.
there is a 2008 notice. Now, notice the date, 2008 predates Obamacare.
2008-1 came out in December
The
of
very
07.
first notice in 2008 from the Department of Labor
Right.
that said that these types of health reimbursement arrangements, now they were talking about the old ones, right, do not allow you to cover a 2% or more shareholder of an S corporation or member of an LLC, okay, and still get these tax benefits for that person. They have to declare it as income, okay? All that we've seen since December of 2016 about these QSEHRAs says, what happens to that 2008 notice?
Right.
And they're all playing it safe, going, well, I guess it still applies because it hasn't been revoked. So we have to operate on the conservative side and say, if you own more than 2% of your company, you can still give yourself that HRA, but you're going to have to pay tax on it, where your other employees are not. I realize that wasn't your question, but it was a good segue into that exception.
So in other words, you can participate,
Pardon?
you just don't.
You can do it, but you're going to pay tax on what the company pays towards your health
In
reimbursement
fact,
arrangement.
isn't that the conundrum here, Karen? The one big issue? Because most more than 2% shareholders are going to meet this
They
list of
fit this,
qualifications.
right? So they're eligible employees, so you have to offer it to
So you
them.
have to include them.
But if they take advantage of it, everything the corporation pays to them in fulfillment of this plan is taxable to the employee, to that 2% owner. If you don't own more than 2% of the company, this isn't taxable to them.
But what's interesting about the issue with the 2008-1 is that it says the health insurance is not deductible by the entity. But what it does say is the health insurance can be paid for or reimbursed for that more than 2% owner. It is deducted as compensation to the shareholder, not subjected to FICA.
Right, so you don't have to pay FICA, but you'll pay income tax.
So we lift it on to the W-2, we increase the wages of the more than 2% owner, and the more than 2% owner is treated as a self-employed person and gets to deduct 100% of those premiums on the front of their tax return. Now, if we follow that these are qualified medical expenses and they're not going to modify 2008-1, then the same thing is going to happen. You're not going to have FICA tax. It's going to be piled on and deducted by the company in the more than 2% owner, W-2, but the subtraction is not going to include whatever that health reimbursement account was. You'd escape FICA taxes, but you would not escape income taxes.
You get all the income taxes. Now, this may sound like an angels on the head of the pin argument between wonks.
It really isn't.
And it kind of is, but the same token, we don't want to make any promises to you if you're more than a 2% owner of a small business corporation and you're thinking, whoa, I finally get to take advantage of this. I don't want any surprises to come across when we say, you know, you're going to have to offer it to yourself, and if you choose to take advantage of it, you can still save some money because you'll avoid having to pay the FICA tax, but it will be a taxable benefit to you. It could be added into what your whole compensation plan is that they tax you on.
Yeah, Norm.
How do you prove the 30 hours if there's no time clock and somebody's working at home and they actually work more than 30 hours?
They're paid on salary?
On the salary, yeah, and not by the hour.
Good question.
I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, I'd start with,
If I were doing this, I'd probably have them give me a timesheet.
I think I'd have to say, what are your typical hours, and or, you know, if there's some sort of expectation of production, so to speak. I realize it's not, you know, widgets.
Piecework or something.
How much is really expected of the average worker to do that? But haven't seen anybody ask that question before.
It's an atypical situation. Almost all of these are going to be hourly employees. And generally, if you're paying somebody a salary, you have an expectation that
Treat
goes
them like
along with that
full-time
salary.
employees.
That they're full-time, part-time, permanent part-time.
Well, if you're
So-
treating them like full-time employees, they're full-time employees.
But if they're not really working 30 hours a week.
I think that what you've got there is that
I think you're gonna have
it's just
to
like
either-
if you're a really good salaried employee and you happen to get it all done in 28 hours, it's still going to be treated like you're a 40-hour week employee.
It's like they do what they have to do, and if they don't have to work 30 hours.
Right, but I think they're eligible anyway, because if you're treating them as FTEs, full-time employees, then
Yeah.
that's what they are, even if we haven't looked at their
FTEs is
clause.
a full-time equivalent, and under Obamacare, I believe that's 32 hours or more for the ALE designation.
30.
Correct. So either you'd want an employment contract with this person stipulating the hours that you're paying them for. In essence, you're converting it to an hourly rate. Have an attorney draft up an employment contract that states what it is your expectation is. If they work over that, they're still on straight time because it'd be less than 40, but you could trigger the responsibility to cover them here. Yes?
I do think so. And I don't know that I'd really feel, I mean, I'd draft that in agreement, but I'd have all sorts of caveats in my cover letter that said, I don't know if this is going to work. You know,
What if this is a relative?
I don't think they care.
It
They don't care.
There's nothing about relatives in here whatsoever.
So, I mean, I think if you're going to do this, I think that employee needs to get the notice and be an eligible employee.
So, another requirement is that once you have the HRA in place, the maximum amount of reimbursement for a single person is $49.50 a year. In the case of family coverage, and family is anybody plus one, whether it's a dependent or it's a spouse, whatever it is, $10,000. Now you can offer different reimbursements for family and single depending upon the cost of coverage. So if an employee's 55, they hit that bracket. Their insurance may be more expensive than the 35-year-olds, even though they're both single, and you can compensate, but you can't exceed these.
You can never go
dollar
over
limits.
these limits. And I don't know. I mean, I have a 25-year-old who's as healthy as a horse, and his insurance is more than $49.50 a year. So, I mean, that's just, yeah.
Right. So there again, understand this is an offer to small employers to help pay pre-tax for the employees, but the commitment is up to the employer on a hard dollar figure. So if you want to offer $200 a month to help, then the ceiling is going to be $2,400 and $4,800 or $5,000 for the family coverage, and that's as much as they are going to get. Yes, sir.
Are there any requirements on as far as how often you have to check for proof that their policy is still active?
So far as we could find, Karen,
No, I couldn't find any. But I think that if I were you, you're going to be providing these notices once a year. I think you should require the proof once a year.
This is just for this coming year, right?
right, in fact,
2018.
Well, you could
This-
have done it for 2017, but nobody did.
What if
nobody knew it was there.
this is everything then?
That's a good question. We don't have an answer for you
You're
that.
basically targeting this for 2000.
It's 2018, and when we get to the requirement, you have to have an announcement out to the employees 90
Next
days
week.
prior to the instigation of the plan. So it's like October 3rd if you want to have this effective for January 1st.
Now, you don't have to have it effective January 1st.
No, you could
I mean,
have it
just from my
effective
perspective,
February
it's-
1st or
For
March
my business,
1st.
we're going to make it effective January 1st because it's cleaner, right? It's just easier to keep those books that way.
And if you cover for less than the entire year, so you decide, there's no way, I can't meet with Karen, I can't get the plan written, this isn't going to work, then you have to prorate these dollar limits. You don't get the $49.50 for under 12 months. You would have to decide, if you were going to do $200 a month, the maximum would be $2,000 for the first year because it would only be a 10-month year. But if you really want to confuse yourself, you could have a fiscal year HRA. I wouldn't do that.
Especially if you aren't operating anything else.
If
on a fiscal
everything's
year. I mean, there's
calendar
nothing that says you
year-
can't have a fiscal year HRA and different
could.
years of books, but why give yourself that headache?
It's just one more due date, one more tracking, and it's a different year than what you're operating on. You're doing the W-2s on an annual basis, on a calendar basis. I just think for a small business owner, you got enough administrative stuff to worry about without then trying to create a fiscal year plan to deal with. Does that make sense?
Who does the letter only go to employees who would qualify?
Who meet the eligibility requirement. And at that point, this is a contract, you would stipulate this is how much we are offering up to this amount and no more.
It's part of what's in the notice, is what the limits are. And the notice only goes to eligible employees. As soon as an employee becomes eligible, so let's say you hire someone next February, you would then be giving them notice come the end of May that they are now eligible, and you need to put them on the plan once they become
So
eligible.
you have to offer it to everybody and not, you can't single out some.
There is no discrimination whatsoever, like we could do with some other retirement plans and other health plans even in the past. If they meet this
Yep.
requirement and they've worked for you for 90 days and they're over 25 and they work more than 30 hours a week, count
There
them in.
it is. That's who you've got to offer it to on that slide.
Does that also include any type of probationary periods as far as when they're hired?
That's totally
It's-
irrelevant. If they've been employed by you
90
for
days.
90 days, they are eligible, even if you consider them on a
Even if they
6-month
have a
probation.
90-day probation,
That's-
once they reach that, they're eligible, it has to be offered to them.
Correct.
So you either convert or to full-time, one direction or the other, out the door or at their desk.
Well, you're an employee.
Right.
An eligible employee.
Okay. These are going to be adjusted for inflation, but inflation is still very, very flat.
I read that, they expect it to go up like another $50.
Yeah, I mean, it's
For
going to
next
be
year.
really modest, like 10.1 and 5,000. So once a plan's been established, we're creating a liability on behalf of the employer. So Patrick, if you say to your 10 employees, or whatever the number is, I'm going to offer you each $2,000, up to $2,000, then as an accountant, I've got to tell you, there's a liability that's unfunded. What are you going to do about that, Patrick? Because you just invited $24,000 of claims, or $22,000, whatever the number is, and are you going to segregate that into a separate account and call it the QSEHRA so that you know you've got that covered for the year? Because there again, this is a reimbursement. They could come to you in the first month, all 10 of them, and present you with a bill for $2,000. Every one of them had kids that are getting orthodontic
As long as
treatment.
they incurred it after January 1st.
Once the plan is implemented, and then you write the checks and you're done for the entire year because they have burned through all of it. They can't bring in bills from last year. It has to be bills that are incurred this year.
And we're talking, I mean, I don't want to bore you with the really out there details, but we're talking your typical medical bills. It would include health insurance premiums, it includes deductibles, it includes co-pays. It does not include in premiums for long-term care insurance, for example.
No.
But for the most part, you'll find that it covers what you think it would.
And their health insurance premiums.
Right.
So would you recommend setting like a separate account? Is that what you're saying, a separate account where you put that money in for the health account and then it's just there?
And then you write the checks or reimburse the
From that
employee out of that account. Just to keep it clean. Of course, you can run one operating account. People do it all the time. But in this case, I wouldn't. Or if you thought there was going to be enough money and you thought the nut was going to be $2,000 a month, you would transfer $2,000 a month into that. But the problem with that is you could have more than one employee come at you and say, but I need $500 4 times, there's the $2,000, and now there's nothing left in the account. You've got to have some kind of a cushion in there in case that happens, right? I mean, don't want to incur fees for bad checks, for example. It's never a good idea. These are use or lose. So Patrick, if all your employee does is bring you a reimbursement check for $200 for the year, the other $1,800 is yours, which is another reason to have a separate account. Because then at the end of the year, you do a final accounting. And if Joe only wanted $500 out of the $2,000, but you put the $2,000 in, you need to move the $1,500, and then you're going to start fresh again with however you're going to load that the following year.
A lot cleaner than an FSA where, like your employee lost $4,800 and the question is, where did it go? It went to the employer because that's who got to keep it.
That is it, and this is true here.
But in this case, it was your money to start with.
Right.
Right.
It's an offer that you're making up to X dollars, whatever that is, up to the limit. And if they don't use it, the liability disappears and you start over again if you offer it another year. There's no reason, you are not required to keep this year on year on year. if the Republicans could get their act together, if the Democrats would lean over the aisle, whatever it may be. But what we have seen over the past 6 months, that's not happening. It is so dysfunctional that it's another reason Karen and I wanted to.
None of the proposals that have been on the table would eliminate the need for your employees to get some form of health insurance.
Correct.
So it's probably still going to be something that is still out there. But who knows? They could get rid of it like they did the HRAs in the past. But for now, it's what the law is.
And I did spend some time going through Graham Cassidy, although it's painful to read that, and searched for the health reimbursement accounts, and there was no mention.
Right.
So even if that had passed, I believe this program would have survived, because at the end of the day, the Republicans are trying to help small businesses in their own clumsy, shoot themselves in the foot way. Okay, no payroll tax burden on these reimbursements. And I say that as an accountant with kind of a smile, because you don't match FICA, no FUTA, nothing like that. However, you do have to keep track of what's going on here. You have to maintain proof of the health insurance provided by the employee. So there's some administrative angst here. Yes, I like this little cartoon. The years 1966 through 95 are blank because I was on tour with the Grateful Dead. Okay, that's what I want to hear from a potential employee. Just record keeping, right? But you can have voids. You can't have voids in this case. The employer must, within 90 days, here's the criteria for setting up this program, before the end of the year or the partial year. So again, you could start this in March, you could start this in July. You have to notify, Karen, right?
Yep, you have to provide a written notice. There is about 2 pages, unless you use small type, worth of information you have to provide in that
Do
notice.
you want them to read it?
That's really not my problem. I just need to know
You're the attorney. Do you want...
No, they should read it, because
Attorneys
otherwise they're
never
going
want
to come to your HR people and go, well, I thought, right? And so if you have a big enough company or maybe a small enough company, it's a good idea just to have a meeting. Guys, I'm handing you this out. This is what it says. Keep this in mind. Come December, come January 1st, we're going to do this.
Who do we get that information from?
Well, there are sample notices out there on the internet. I can help you draft one when we draft the plan. That's all the kind of thing that's pretty much the paperwork you need to have available to your employee. Is that notice has to go to every eligible employee, and you have to have the plan on file.
Okay, so you have to have a statement of the amount of the employee's permitted benefit under the HRA. So here's our dollar figure. Can't exceed these dollar amounts. Can be prorated. In fact, they must be prorated if it's less than 12 months. What else, Karen?
Well, at that point, then you should say that they have to be able to. They have to provide you with proof of insurance. That should be in your notice. That says if you fail to qualify for insurance or keep your insurance, you need to notify me. That needs to be in the notice. Me meaning the company, the HR. I'm the only boss, so that's why me and the business are the same thing. And so you have to tell your employee that. They have to be on note. Oh, sorry. They're beating on me because I'm beating on my microphone.
Don't do that.
So you have to provide notice to the employee of that as well. You have to tell them you're eligible because you've worked for me for more than 90 days, because you work more than 30 hours. If your hours go below 30 hours, you may no longer be eligible, at which point you will no longer be eligible for this program.
And there's something in Obamacare to help make health insurance premiums affordable. So if your employee goes through the marketplace, it's possible that because their income level is such that they're entitled to, they can receive an advanced premium subsidy. So you go into the marketplace, you become ineligible for Medicaid. That's the first thing you have to do in the Colorado marketplace. And then you go back in and you say, okay, I'm going to make $25,000 a year, and I have a child who lives with me, and the health insurance premiums are going to come back at $500 a month, which may exceed the affordability criteria for the health insurance premiums. So because of that, when I work on their tax return, they might get something called a premium tax credit. Get money back because they followed all the rules, they paid their premiums, they had the essential coverage. And in order to help them with their monthly bills, instead of waiting for me to do the tax return to figure that out, the marketplace will offer them a stipend each month that is kind of a pre-funding of that premium tax credit. It's
Like
a
a
subsidy.
discount on their premium.
Well, it's dollars that are coming out of somebody else's pocket, if I may, to pay their health insurance premiums. Right. But that's presuming that when they went into the marketplace, they were honest about what their income was expected to be for the coming year. And based upon that criteria, the marketplace said, oh, this is not affordable for you. We're going to help you with the premium subsidy. Now, if you underestimated what your income was going to be. One of my clients, here's the deal, went into the marketplace, and in June, she was getting a premium subsidy of $700 a month. In June, her mother died. And in September, she received a $66,000 payment from her mother's IRA. Fully taxable, shot her income through the roof. Now, back in November, when she signed up for this in the preceding year, she had no idea her mother was going to die and no idea she was going to receive this boatload of money. She owed $7,800 back of that premium subsidy. Every dollar that had been given to her to help pay for her health insurance, again, eligibility, she wasn't eligible anymore. Her income doubled and then some. If we're giving the employees money that is pre-tax out of our qualified small employer health reimbursement account, they cannot double dip by going to the marketplace. They don't claim this income and then say, my income is X and I'm going to take the subsidy without taking into account what can come out of the HRA. Because, I beg your pardon?
Does that have to be in your notice when you hand that out to your employee?
I don't think so.
No, but they should be informed of the consequence. I think that is correct, Karen. There's the statement, and that is part of the statement.
Well,
that this is going to be information that will be provided to the powers that be in their W-2.
So
if they claim the advanced payment of the premium subsidy, when they get their W-2 at the end of the year, that health reimbursement amount that came out of that pre-tax fund you set up is going to be disclosed on their W-2. And that becomes part of the matrix to see whether or not they owed back any of this subsidy. Does that make sense? You can't get it pre-tax from the employer and get it pre-tax from the government.
definitely no double dipping. The reason I question it, I just think that, and I guess I don't have a copy of a potential notice, but it's written in a way that I don't think they'd understand that to be what it means. And so
we're back to the accountant sitting across the desk from the client who took the premium subsidy saying, well, I'm sorry they didn't explain this to you,
and that's again the thing to have at the meeting, and you can put more in the notice.
I would put more in the
than
notice.
what the law requires.
And if they don't keep up the insurance, here's the other criteria. If they don't have minimum essential coverage, they go into the marketplace, they sign up for 1 month, they got proof of insurance that they can hand you, and then they stop paying, then they're going to be subject to the shared responsibility penalty and they are ineligible for the HRA. Yes?
The QSEHRA can reimburse for more than health insurance.
Absolutely.
Qualified medical expenses.
Correct.
So, say the employee comes in the first of the year, he's got this huge medical bill. Give me my $2,000.
Correct.
He doesn't use any of that for health insurance payments. Are you saying that he's still going to have to tell the exchange that he got the $2,000?
It shows up on
As
the
far
W-2.
as his income, for what they calculated as his medical expenses. So yeah, I think that is true.
I think that when we process the 1040 for that employee who's receiving it, if they got the advanced payment, that assistance credit, If they've taken any money out of the HRA, I believe the first dollar is going to be assumed to be spent for the health insurance premium. That would be my gut reaction here. Because the statement for the HRA has to discuss this, and I know it shows up on the W-2. There's a new code that captures that information.
Well, and it fits the philosophy, the policy that they're trying to get at. You suddenly have more money available for medical expenses than we thought you would.
Right.
So you have to tell us when you have more money available for medical expenses because you got a payout from mom's IRA or because you got money from your employer.
And if they don't have minimum essential coverage for any month, that's when the penalty triggers. So we have the premium tax credit and the subsidy for being a good citizen and getting health insurance. And we have the stick side of this, which is if you don't get health insurance that's minimum essential coverage, then we're going to hit you with a shared responsibility penalty that can be equivalent to the bronze coverage of insurance. So we've had one of our clients is an MD, no kidding, and he does not carry health insurance. Why would he? He can give himself a shot, right? And besides that, he's God. We've already figured that out.
Yeah, I want to see him give himself a few other of the medical
I'm sure he does.
that I can think of.
Stuff that I don't want to know about.
Yeah.
But, which is probably legal in the state of Colorado. Didn't we vote on that? But he has an extra $2,900 a year, he's a single guy, that he has to pay because that's equivalent to the lowest coverage, and he's got to write him a check. It just makes me crazy to pay for nothing. Wouldn't you rather have the insurance? Employers also must report, here it is, the total amount of permitted benefit under this on the employee's W-2. So you've got tracking that you've got to do. Again, the reason for that separate account, what went in, what went out, by employee. You've got to know that in the payroll preparation. You've got to have that information.
I'd like to go back for a minute to John's scenario, though. You've got the employee who incurs the $2,000 bill in January. He comes in and he says, I want my full $2,000. And then come June, he's no longer eligible for, he doesn't have insurance, right? He's still your employee and everything, but he didn't keep his insurance up. That's really not your problem at that point. You paid out what you had to pay. He doesn't get it back, you don't get it back. It just, you kept your obligations there.
And you still have to report what was paid out to him. He's still going to be responsible, or she is, for that. So there's administrative work in this. I don't want to tell you this is nirvana for everything. If for any month payments or reimbursements are made from this for the medical expenses, they would be subject to withholding if in that month that is provided to somebody who doesn't have the minimum essential coverage. So here's the deal. If you then find out from the marketplace that 6 months in, they quit paying the premiums. So for the last 6 months of the year, you thought they were still eligible for the HRA. Here's the consequence to the employee, that they notify the employer when they cancel insurance. So you're not going to be responsible for their bad acts by dropping the insurance, and you continue to make that $200 a month eligible for them because you, in good faith, thought that that's the way it was supposed to work.
They provided it that once. After that, the responsibility is on them. But as I said, if I were you, I'd ask for it once a year.
And logistically, let me talk about the marketplace and their reporting. They are incredibly slow getting information out. Where the employer now has to issue the W-2 by January 31st, the marketplace, in theory, is supposed to have the 1095 out to the participant by the end of January. Every year under Obamacare, we have had extensions into March and April. So when the employer issues the W-2, does not tax the HRA benefit, and then is informed by the marketplace that the employee was not eligible the last 9 months of the year, there's a tax consequence to the employer too, I want you to be aware of. If we have to treat this as wages, what happens? subject to FICA, subject to SUDA. It means revising the W-2s. A W-2C has to be filed, 941 correction has to be filed, 940 has to be corrected. All of the payroll tax reports have to be filed. So you better hope that your employees, and there's no other proof than once a year that they get certified that they have the health insurance. So that's a downside, I think, because you've got another unrecognized liability if they fail to keep up that minimum essential coverage.
So take that into consideration when you consider your
You may have
maximum
FICA
is.
taxes, right.
That you could end up paying some tax on that. Whatever you said is going to be $3,600 a year. Make sure that you could, if you needed to, bear the burden for $3,600 plus the tax.
And here's another criterion. I don't want to confuse the issue any more than we already have, but the HRAs can reimburse or pay any medical expenses. If it's a smoking cessation plan, if it's a chiropractor, whatever. Massage therapy, as long as they're licensed to do massage. This includes health insurance, and we think probably includes group health insurance. So if Christina's husband covers her and the cost of the spousal coverage coming out of Andrew's check is $270 a month, Christina could come to us with the HRA and say, that's a qualified medical expense, it's a health insurance premium. But again, we're getting into a little murky area because there's nothing 100% about that. It's basically putting us back to that employer payment plan again, where I could reimburse the health insurance premiums because there was group coverage eligible by a spouse or another family member that could cover.
Right, and we just don't have an answer on that.
Yes.
Can we just go back to that slide?
Sure.
I'm still stuck on this other point that we keep bringing up. So it says you can reimburse or pay any medical expense.
Mhm.
So an employee comes in with a bill or an invoice for a copay, x-rays, whatever.
Sure.
So in my mind, that's reducing their medical expense. It's not their health insurance premiums, so it wouldn't apply to the premium tax credit when you're saying that's issue. People need to not separate that when they're thinking, because it just throws me that you have to bring in the actual invoice.
And it
But
may
it's
end
another
up, Barb, that it's a rebuttable position, that you didn't use the HRA for your premiums because you had $2,000 worth of co-pays, medical prescriptions, and that's what you used it for, and that's what you presented to the employer, and never asked for insurance. But, okay, everything, Barb Arnold handles notices in our office, and she knows that everything in dealing with taxing agencies, whether it's IRS or the state of Colorado, is based upon two things: the legality and the technology. And everything in our lives seems to be run by algorithms. So my bet is, if I'm going to have this information on the W-2 and it's going to show, what's the assumption going to be?
Well, I still think the philosophy fits. I mean,
And I think it does
agree with you.
too.
The philosophy
You
is
had extra cash.
you had more income than we anticipated, and that it got spent on medical bills was something we had already figured into
And it's
our
not
algorithm.
phantom, it's cash. Because the only thing that's going to hit the W-2 is what you actually received in reimbursement. Not that Patrick said you could have $2,000, but you took $500. The $500 is what it is going to hit the W-2. Now, $500 throws them out of the marketplace and the premium credit. I can't imagine. I don't think these are going to be large enough unless you go to the absolute maximum dollar figure. John?
Can you have a plan that will only reimburse the insurance and
No.
not the medical?
No. Qualified medical expenses, you do not get to put any restrictions on that.
So they can't use the money to pay their premium?
Oh, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So they come
Absolutely.
Every month and just give you a bill for their premium, and then you would write them a check for that?
Correct.
Yep.
That's the entire point, is that is an eligible medical expense, is their health insurance premiums. Has to be available again to all the eligible employees, but the amount can differ depending upon family size. Obviously, you can go up to $10,000 if they've got plus one. or if there's a difference in the health insurance premiums due to the age brackets. And they're very broad. There are only 3 now. There used to be 6 prior to Obamacare. That's kind of what happened to the millennials at large, because they had really cheap premiums because they were in the bottom 1/6. They got moved up to the bottom 1/3. And some of us older folks got blended in to the 5 and 6 tier, and some premiums actually went down for the old people, right? The elderly, the more mature, however we're going to call them.
Seasoned citizens
Seasoned
is what my
citizens.
son calls
Okay.
them.
So, any other questions? Anything else we haven't covered?
Just to be clear,
I don't know how my time is.
does an
I think it's good.
employee have to have medical insurance to be able to?
Yes.
Yes, they have to provide you
have
with
to
proof of
have-
that insurance.
Minimum essential coverage.
Minimum essential coverage through the ACA. And then if they maximize their benefit on January 15th and are no longer employed by March 30th, that's money still gone, correct?
Correct.
Because you can't prorate it back from the employee.
Correct.
It still shows up on their W-2 and it's a done deal.
Yep.
Which is just another liability that kind of opens up.
Yep.
Okay.
That's correct. You have no clawback. In the case of the FSAs, the flexible spending account, you could have that situation where they elect to defer $2,500 and it's out of their money, out of their paycheck, and they present you with the bill for the orthodontist January 15th. I want my $2,500, and they quit March 1st. So all the employer got was $200 out of 2 pay periods for 2 months, $400 against the $2,500. I believe the law allows clawback provisions against severance package, whatever it may be, or it becomes a liability. I think that's part of the FSA contract.
But in the HRA, it just is what it is.
Or it just
But
becomes taxable.
that potential liability that you alerted to is if he's not employed in April, then, and they add it into the W-2 and it ends up kicking them into those categories where now you're going to have to pay FICA and the like. You just need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, because there could be an additional cost to what the medical reimbursement was. Make sense? Okay. Any part of it? Okay. I think we're done. Thanks for coming. And if you didn't get a chance, there are some sandwiches, fruit, etc. Would you mind asking Sherry if she would come in, please? Okay, thanks. We have, I'm going to bore you with something for just a second. How many of you know Sherry Solomon? Okay. Well, we need to talk to her for a second. So as soon as she gets here, and she'll drag her feet because she's shy, right?
Hey Karen, could you make it so that when you did the providing the insurance, make it in December, right before the end of the year, so you could know by the end of the year?
Well, the problem is that they have to get it from the marketplace. And so they probably got it in March.
Sherry, would you mind stepping up here? We thought you should present their, so the applause sign is still up. This is Sherry Solomon, and this month, she's been with COET 2 for 10 years. It seems like only yesterday. So, that's a non-taxable benefit. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, and thanks for coming. We really appreciate it. Okay, enjoy.
Well, like I said, we can prepare one, but there are samples on the internet, the notice. I have never found a sample plan, but there are samples on the internet of the notice that can be provided and what it needs to contain.
But you gotta get it out by Monday?
Well,
if you're going to cover on January 1st,
January, and that may not be practical. You may decide that you're going to start at February 1st.
I'm not sure I would if you haven't thought about it before today. But I wouldn't want to jump into it.
It's not mandatory, right? It's optional.
All of this is optional.
All
Starting
of this
January 1st
is-
is optional. You could decide to start February 1st or April 1st or whatever you want. You just have to prorate all those numbers we gave you.
Okay? Okay. Yeah, I knew I was going to embarrass her, but I wanted to. It has to be part of a presentation. You know that, to make it tax deductible.
I did not know
And
that.
tax-free. It's an